A while ago, an organization called National Fatherhood Initiative did a survey. Their findings reported the federal government spends about $100 billion every year on programs such as child support enforcement and anti-poverty efforts that support father-absent homes. Now that is a conservative estimate which doesn't include federal benefit programs for different communities and direct costs related to poor outcomes of children from father-absent homes, long-term costs, and reduced tax income from low-earning single-parent families, many of which subsist on aid from the government. The report said that the $100 billion a year figure represents only the public costs of absent fathers. In other words, the personal costs in terms of broken hearts, broken homes, and human suffering are so enormous, no one could begin to put a price tag on it. The 2011 census reported that 24 million children live apart from their biological dads. 64% are black, 34% are Hispanic, and 2% are white. Way back in 1960, only 11% of homes had absent dads. Now these children today are at least 2 to 3 times more likely to be poor, use drugs, experience educational, health, emotional, and behavioral problems, to be victims of child abuse, and to engage in criminal behavior than their peers who live with married biological or adoptive parents. And absent fathers are just as likely to be more responsible for teen pregnancy, sexual abuse, suicide, and numerous other problems. The Bible emphasizes the importance of strong fathers. In Genesis 18:19, the Lord said this about Abraham: "For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord." This is what the Lord said about Abraham. Proverbs 22:6, everybody knows that one. It says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Ephesians 6:4 says, "And you, fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord." Strong fathers are essential for non-dysfunctional homes. Our country went through a revolution of sorts in the 1960s. Those of us who were here back then can surely remember that. Up until then, divorce was rare. Couples living together outside of marriage was rare. Abortion was not only rare, it was illegal. There were problems with alcohol, illegal drugs, and pornography, yes, but nothing like what we're seeing on today's scale. Back then, there was prayer to God and Bible reading in public schools. Up until the 60s, most mothers stayed at home or perhaps worked only part-time. And we know what made them have to leave the home to earn a full-time living: father-absent homes. But the 1960s brought about a big upheaval with riots, drugs, promiscuity, rock and roll, etc. And those same rebellious, dope-using hippies that were rioting are the ones who are now running our universities, our public schools, the media, and politics. Today, 1 in 3 children is growing up without their father. But it's not just absent fathers who have caused broken homes and delinquent children. We can't put all of the blame on them. Slacker fathers and permissive fathers, fathers who may stick around but who don't discipline their children, have made their own contribution to the mess also. I'm talking about the ones who do not attend Sabbath school with their children, the ones who do not pray with their children, the ones who don't read the Bible with their children, etc. Some slacker dads are church members, but they're not consistent when it comes to being a spiritual head of the home. My focus today will not be about absent fathers, but it will be about slacker fathers and permissive fathers. It's easy to blame absent fathers for the problems with our children in society, but let's see how slacker and permissive fathers play an equally damaging role in the problem. If you know me, you know I like to do character studies in my sermons. So today I will be doing a character study about a slacker dad, a permissive dad. That person my character study will be about is Eli. So I named today's sermon, Eli, the epitome of an unfit dad. First off, who was Eli? Well, Eli was a judge of Israel for 40 years. He was God's spokesman to the people. Eli also was the high priest just before Samuel. And we all know who Samuel was. Eli was also the father of two sons as well, Hophni and Phinehas. And they were also priests in Israel. And we are first introduced to them in 1 Samuel, the first chapter. Let's take a look at that. 1 Samuel 1. By the way, Sister Orly, I love my new Bible. Thank you. It's great. Sister Orly gave me this. She saw my other one falling apart, I guess. This is great. I do too. Okay, 1 Samuel 1 verse 3 says, and this man happens to be the future father of Samuel. His name was Elkanah. And this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto Yahweh of hosts in Shiloh. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of Yahweh, were there. So here where we are introduced to the Hophni and Phinehas, they were the priests. Their father was the high priest, and they were priests as well. Now, there's no record of any direct sin or evil in Eli's life. He was guiltless of any aggressive crime as far as we can see. He was old, but he had a youthful heart. And you could tell he loved Samuel, and that Samuel loved him. And when he found out Samuel would be taking his place, he didn't rebel, he didn't grow bitter, he didn't become envious or spiteful. And he didn't say bad things about Samuel. He actually tried to help Samuel. He taught Samuel to be a good high priest. 1 Samuel 3, 8 and 9, just for a little example. 1 Samuel 3 and verse 8. And Yahweh called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for thou didst call me. And Eli then perceived that Yahweh had called the child. Samuel had heard the call twice before and had gone to Eli, and Eli said, well, it wasn't me. Go back to speak. But the third time he realized that it was God who was calling him. Verse 9. Therefore Eli said unto Samuel, Go, lie down, and it shall be, if he call thee, that thou shalt say, Speak, Yahweh, for thy servant heareth. So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Eli could have told Samuel any old thing. But when he realized that it was God calling him, he told Samuel exactly what to do. Now Eli was actually a fine man, a good man. He wasn't really an ungodly man. So with all those good points, what was wrong? Why do I say he is the epitome of an unfit father? What was his sin? His sin was not in what he did, it was in what he failed to do. As you know, there are two types of sin, right? The sin of commission, when you actually commit a sin, and there's a sin of omission. When you know the right thing to do, but don't do it. You can find that in James 4:17. To that person who knows the right thing to do and doesn't do it, that is a sin. Those are the words. And that's the sin Eli was guilty of. He was guilty of the sin of omission. He knew the right thing to do, but he just didn't do it. He wasn't guilty of sinning himself, but his sons sure were guilty. And those sins of his sons were not done in secret either. They were done right out in the open. So Eli was quite aware of them. 1 Samuel 2. I'll give you a little idea of how sinful these sons were. 1 Samuel 2, and I'll begin in verse 12. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial. That's saying a lot right there. And it also says they knew not Yahweh. They were priests, yet they didn't know Yahweh. And the priest's custom, Hophni and Phinehas, their custom with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the servant of the priest came while the flesh was in seething with a flesh hook of 3 teeth in his hand. And he struck it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. And all that the flesh hook brought up, the priest took for himself. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came thither to make sacrifice. And before they burnt the fat, the priest's servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, Give flesh to roast for the priest, for he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. They wanted to take it before it was cooked so they could get as much of it as they could. And if any man said unto him, Let them not fail to burn the fat presently, and then take as much as thy soul desireth, then he would answer him, Nay, but thou shalt give it to me now, and if not, I will take it by force. Wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before Yahweh, for these men abhorred the offering of Yahweh. They corrupted the offering by doing these things. So Eli's sin was he did not put a stop to the evils with which his sons were indulging themselves. Look at verse 28 in chapter 2. Verse 28. God here is saying, And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to offer unto mine altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? And did I give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? Wherefore kick you at my sacrifice and at mine offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honorest thy sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel, my people. Eli didn't do what this holy season signifies we should be doing, putting sin out of our lives, right? He didn't put sin out of the lives of the Israelites. It didn't matter that the sins were committed by his sons. His job was to put sin out of Israel. And by not doing that, he came off as a weak and indulgent father whom God then held responsible for the actions of his sons. Eli's sons were very wicked men. They were very wicked. They were wicked as men, and they were wicked as priests. And Eli failed in this most important job, raising his children to be for God. As you recall, back in chapter 2, verse 12, the Bible called Hophni and Phinehas sons of Belial. That literally means they didn't know the Lord. And it even says they didn't know the Lord. I don't know how you could be a priest in Israel and not know Yahweh, but they were. You know, because that in and of itself tells us quite a bit about the type of men they must have been, right? They were sons of Belial. Now, Belial is a term used in the Old Testament that always referred to the worse than worthless people, rebellious and lawless people. Now, the word is used only once in the New Testament, one time in the New Testament. And I'm sure you know who that was referring to that one time. Let's go look at it. 2 Corinthians, the 6th chapter. I'm sure you can realize before we even get to it who it's talking about. 2 Corinthians, the 6th chapter. If you don't, you will by the time we read the verse. 2 Corinthians 6, and I'll read verse 15. And what concord has Messiah with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? Belial is referred to, is talking about Satan. Satan is Belial. And anyone who is like him are sons of Belial. People who were wicked and rebellious were referred to as sons or daughters of Belial or Satan. Some examples of the children of Belial are idol worshippers, drunkards, whoremongers, liars, etc. I'm sure you get the idea. Now, in pagan society, temple orgies were the norm. And you know Eli's sons were guilty of similar practices. Let's go back to 1 Samuel 2. And I'll read verse 22. 1 Samuel 2, 22. Now Eli was very old, and heard all that his sons did unto all Israel. He heard about it. He knew about it. And how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. Now, look at 1 Samuel 4 right quick. 1 Samuel 4 and verse 19. And his daughter-in-law, Eli's daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child and near to be delivered. This reveals that Phinehas was married. He had a wife and she was pregnant. And we'll read a little bit more about her later, but I just wanted to show you that this man was pregnant. While his pregnant wife was at home, Phinehas was in the temple committing adultery. Let's go back to 1 Samuel 2 and finish reading that passage. I'll start back at 22 again. Now Eli was very old and heard all that his sons did unto all Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he said unto them, Eli did, why do you such things? For I hear of your evil dealings by all this people. Nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear. You make Yahweh's people to transgress. If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against Yahweh, who shall entreat for him? Notwithstanding, they hearken not unto the voice of their father, because Yahweh would slay them. Okay. So Eli did confront his sons. He did make a token effort. But they paid him no attention because his rebuke was too mild. Something that must have been happening on a regular basis by now. It seems obvious they had no respect for his authority as their judge, as their high priest, and not even as their father. Now, since they didn't listen to their father's mild rebuke, Eli should have followed through on his admonition. He should have taken the next step. He should have done more to show he meant business. He should have restrained them and punished them. In fact, he should have removed them from their positions as priests. And according to the law back then, he should have had them stoned. That's right, stoned. Eli should have had both his sons stoned. The law provided for the stoning of the sons of Belial. It's in Deuteronomy 17. I'll read it to you. Deuteronomy 17. Deuteronomy 17, beginning verse 2, says, If there be found among you with any of thy gates, which Yahweh thy Elohim giveth thee, man or woman that hath wrought wickedness in the sight of Yahweh thy Elohim in transgressing his covenant, and has gone and served other mighty ones and worshipped them, either the sun or moon or any of the hosts of heaven, which I have not commanded, and it be told thee, and you have heard of it, and inquired diligently, and found it to be true, and certain that such abomination is wrought in Israel, then shalt thou bring forth that man or that woman which has committed that wicked thing unto thy gates, even that man or that woman, and shalt stone them with stones till they die. And Deuteronomy 21. Deuteronomy chapter 21. Deuteronomy 21 verse 18 says, If a man have a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that when they have chastened him will not hearken unto them, then shall his father and his mother lay hold on him and bring him out unto the elders of his city and unto the gate of his place. And they shall say unto the elders of his city, This our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And all the men of his city shall stone him with stones that he die. So shalt thou put evil away from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. So this is what Eli should have had done to his two sons, but he didn't do that. He didn't follow through as he should have. And it must have angered God to the max. Eli was simply too soft, too easy where his sons were concerned. He was too good-natured and weak towards them. Now, he may have loved them, but apparently not enough to bring them under his control. So let's go back again, please, to 1 Samuel 2. First Samuel 2 and verse 29. Let me read that verse again. God's talking to Eli. He said, Wherefore kick you at my sacrifice and at mine offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honorest thy sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel, my people. So by not restraining and punishing his sons, God felt Eli honored his sons above him. What does it say in verse 30? Wherefore Yahweh Elohim of Israel saith, I said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now Yahweh saith, Be it far from me. For them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. So here God is saying, if men don't honor him, then he won't honor them, because they are despising him by not honoring him. So Eli was guilty of dishonoring God by not correcting his wicked sons. You know, at the very least, he should have had them beaten. Their crimes deserved at least that. Look at Proverbs. Proverbs 23. Proverbs 23 and 23:13 says, Withhold not correction from the child, for if you beat him with the rod, he shall not die. We know what that means, right? Okay. You know, children need direction. They need boundaries. And you know they're going to test the limits of what they can and can't do when they're young, just to see what their parents will do. You moms and dads know that. And you know, some kids even need a good spanking. But all they ever get nowadays is a pat on the wrist or a, "Stop that, Johnny. Johnny, stop. Johnny, will you stop that?" Over and over and over again. Then before you know it, they've grown up to become totally wicked and godless, just like Hophni and Phinehas. Because that's all Eli was doing to his son. "Stop that, Hophni. Stop that, Phinehas. Stop it, stop it, stop it." Eventually they quit paying attention to him. It's obvious that Eli's mild rebukes of his sons only served to make them more brazen and evil. In fact, you know the name of Phinehas means brazen mouth? That's what Phinehas actually means. That probably meant he had a wicked tongue, huh? Hophni means fighter. So Hophni was probably the bully of the two fathers. He probably bullied the people who came to make the sacrifices. But whether it was because Eli loved them that he doted on them, or because he was afraid of them that he dealt so mildly with them, or that he was just too busy, it doesn't really matter. His job was to bring his son's shenanigans to a stop. That was his job. You know, there have been many times when foolish parents have been heard to say, "I love my child too much to ever spank him." But the Bible teaches the exact opposite, doesn't it? Proverbs 13. We're in Proverbs. Go to chapter 13. The Bible says the exact opposite. Really, it's saying you don't love your child if you don't spank him. But Proverbs 13:24 says, "He that spares his rod hates his son." Wow. "But he that loveth him chastens him betimes." Wow. So the people who say they love their children too much to spank them, the Bible says, no, you're wrong. You're a liar. If you don't spank your child, you don't love your child. Now, if Eli really loved his sons, he would have corrected them, disciplined them, and spanked them at an early age. That's when you have to get to children, right? Early in life. Because the word betimes in this verse, where it says in verse 24, "He that loves him chastens him betimes." You know, the word betimes means at an early age. So it's telling you here that you should chasten your child at an early age. You should start with them early on in life. Eli's leniency was evidence of his lack of discernment and his lack of zeal for the honor of God and for God's tabernacle. He allowed his sons to dishonor God's tabernacle. So, says Eli, absolutely refused to handle the situation with his sons. It was left to God to step in and do what needed to be done. God had to kill Hophni and Phinehas for their wickedness. Please go back to 1 Samuel 2. First Samuel 2, 25. Verse 25. "If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against Yahweh, who shall entreat him for him? Notwithstanding, they hearken not unto the voice of their father, because Yahweh would slay them." Look at verse 34. "And this shall be a sign unto you that shall come upon your two sons, on Hophni and Phinehas. In one day they shall die, both of them." This is Yahweh talking to Eli. Chapter 4 of 1 Samuel. Chapter 4, verse 10. And we will see it actually happen here. Chapter 4, verse 10. "And the Philistines fought, and Israel was smitten. And they fled every man into his tent. And there was a very great slaughter. For there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. And the ark of Elohim was taken. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were slain. They were slain with 30,000 other footmen that day against the Philistines. God said he would do it, and he did it. Galatians in the New Testament, Galatians 6. If you can keep your place in 1 Samuel, because as you notice, I keep going back to it. Galatians 6. In verse 7 it says, "Be not deceived, Elohim is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." Now his two sons, they had long hardened their hearts. And since Eli did nothing about it, God had no choice but to kill them. Please go to Proverbs 29. Proverbs 29. Proverbs 29 in the very first verse. "He that being often reproved hardens his neck shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy." Suddenly be destroyed. I'm sure Hophni and Phinehas' death came on them rather suddenly that day. They had no idea it was happening. But God didn't punish just Hophni and Phinehas. He also punished Eli. Let's go back to 1 Samuel 2. I'm sorry, this time go to 3. 1 Samuel 3. He didn't just punish the sons. Oh yeah, Eli got punished as well. 1 Samuel 3, and I will begin in verse 11. "And Yahweh said to Samuel, Behold, I will do a thing in Israel, at which both the ears of everyone that heareth it shall tingle. In that day I will perform against Eli all things which I have spoken concerning his house. When I begin, I will also make an end. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he didn't restrain them." That was his sin. "And therefore I have sworn unto the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be purged with sacrifice nor offering forever." And Samuel lay until the morning and opened the doors of the house of Yahweh. And Samuel was afraid to tell Eli about the vision that he had. But then Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." And he answered, "Here am I." And he said, "What is the thing that Yahweh has said unto you? I pray you, don't hide it from me. Elohim do so to thee, and more also, if you hide anything from me of all the things that he said unto you." So Samuel told him everything, and he hid nothing from him. And Eli said, "It is Yahweh, let him do what seems him good." Yeah, he had to accept that was coming. So let's read about Eli's punishment, and starting in chapter 4, verse 1. Chapter 4, verse 1. "And the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out against the Philistines to battle, and pitched against Ebenezer, and the Philistines pitched in Aphek. And the Philistines put themselves in array against Israel, and when they joined the battle, Israel was smitten before the Philistines. And they slew of the army in the field about 4,000 men. And when the people were coming to the camp, the elders of Israel said, Wherefore hath Yahweh smitten us today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of Yahweh out of Shiloh unto us, that when it comes among us, it may save us out of the hand of our enemies. Not. So anyway, they sent to Shiloh that they might bring from thence the ark of the covenant of Yahweh of hosts, which dwells between the cherubims. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of Elohim. I guess they're the ones who brought the covenant. But I want to skip from here because we know what happened to Hophni and Phinehas. Down to verse 10. Actually, we know about Hophni and Phinehas, so let me skip 10 and 11 and go straight to 12. And there, after Hophni and Phinehas were slain, there ran a man of Benjamin out of the army and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes. Wait a minute, before I mention that, I just thought about something. Early in chapter 4, when they went against the Philistines, they lost only, 4,000 men, right? And so they said, well, let's get the Ark of the Covenant. Maybe if we bring that out here, that'll save us. But it didn't. 30,000 died then. I don't think the Ark of the Covenant worked for them very well at that point. But anyway, verse 12. And there ran a man of Benjamin out of the army and came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes rent and with earth upon his head. And when he came, lo, Eli sat upon a seat by the wayside watching, for his heart trembled for the ark of Elohim. And when the man came into the city and told it, all the city cried out. And when Eli heard the noise of the crying, he said, what meaneth the noise of this tumult? And the man came in hastily and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old. His eyes were dim, that he couldn't see. And the man said unto Eli, I am he that came out of the army, and I fled today out of the army. And he said, what is there done, my son? And the messenger answered and said, Israel is fled before the Philistines, and there has been also a great slaughter among the people. And thy two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of Elohim is taken. So they brought the ark out there and they lost it. They lost 30,000 men and they lost the ark. Verse 18, and it came to pass when he made mention of the ark of Elohim, that he, Eli, fell from off the seat backward by the side of the gate, and his neck was broke, and he died. For he was an old man and heavy, and he had judged Israel 40 years. I wonder if that heavy means he was fat. Yeah. And his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, near to be delivered. And when she heard the tidings that the ark of Elohim was taken, and that her father-in-law and husband were dead, she bowed herself and travailed, for her pains came upon her. And about the time of her death, she died too. The women that stood by her said unto her, fear not, for thou hast borne a son. But she answered not, and neither did she regard it. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, the glory is departed from Israel, because the ark of Elohim is taken, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. And she said, the glory is departed from Israel, for the ark of Elohim is taken. So this was God's curse that was pronounced upon Eli. Thus was it fulfilled this day. He lost his sons that day. He lost his daughter-in-law, and he lost himself, his life. So the Lord punished not only the two sons, but Eli as well. His portion as the high priest of Israel gave him a greater responsibility to raise his sons properly, and a greater condemnation for failing to do so. The way Eli handled the situation with his sons made him what is popularly known as a pious softy. He made a play at being pious with his sons with his mild rebuke, but he didn't go nearly as far as he should have with them. He didn't follow through. And obviously his sons didn't think he would, probably because he had been too soft with them for too long. So they just continued doing their own thing. pious softness simply is not the way of God, nor is it the way of our Savior, Yeshua. If you remember John 2:13-17, when he beat those money changers out of the temple, I mean, he threw them out. He didn't say get out. He actually threw them out, got a whip and beat them. There was nothing soft about the way he handled that situation. His rebukes of the Pharisees weren't in the least bit mild either. Man, he had some harsh words for them. They were so harsh, in fact, that the Pharisees wanted him dead. Our Messiah was no softy, no matter how men try to portray him on the movie screen. I'm sure you've all seen movies like that. Christ walking around like some soft-spoken nothing. That was not our Lord. In the home, pious softness will not work. It won't work at all. Parents have to teach their children. Deuteronomy 32:46. 32:46 says, and he said unto them, set your hearts unto all the words which I testify among you this day, which you shall command your children to observe to do all the words of this law. So we're supposed to teach our children all the words of the law of God. And you know, this also includes restraining them when it becomes necessary. Let's go to that famous book, Proverbs, the 3rd chapter. Proverbs 3. Verse 12. It says, for whom Yahweh loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in whom he delights. Chapter 29 of Proverbs. I mean, there are instructions throughout this whole Bible about how we should raise our children. 29 of chapter of Proverbs, verse 15. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings his mother to shame. When the wicked are multiplied, transgression increases, but the righteous shall see their fall. Correct thy son, and he shall give thee rest. Yea, he shall give thee light unto thy soul. So correct them. Parents simply cannot be slack or permissive in their roles as parents, because children are going to take advantage of it. I mean, as children, they really don't know any better, right? They don't know. All they know is what they want. That's all they know. Until they're taught there's more to life than what they want. And we have to be the ones to teach them. And there are far too many children growing up today without any parameters set for their actions. Parents just can't say no to their little ones. They let them do whatever they want. And sadly, the children end up becoming the rulers over them. They wrap their parents around their fingers and end up getting away with murder. Now, many parents will say no when they're irritated, but they won't follow through with the punishment if the child continues to disobey. Permissive parents produce permissive children, and permissiveness destroys everybody, as you just saw in the case of Eli. Destroyed his whole family. Pious softness fails in society. As the years have passed, our government has become more and more soft on crime. The Bible clearly teaches that governments are supposed to punish evildoers. Let's go to 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter. 1 Peter 2. First Peter 2, verse 13. 1 Peter 2:13 says, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for Yahweh's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors as unto them that are sent by him, for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of them that do well. So the government's job is to punish evildoers. And you know what? That includes carrying out the death penalty, no matter how much they think that it's barbaric. Romans 13. Romans 13. Their job is to protect society. And if that means getting rid of evil people by giving them the death penalty, that's what they should do. Romans 13. Verse 3. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and you shall have praise of the same. For he is the minister of Elohim to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he bears not the sword in vain. For he is minister of Elohim, a revenger, to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Now believe me, what do you think that sword is for? It's not to use to take your life if you do evil. Not to just cut off a little pinky, but to cut off your life. How about Genesis 9? Way back in Genesis 9. You know, they like to say the people in the Old Testament were just too barbaric. Yeah, okay. We could use a little of that barbarism right now. Genesis 9, verse 5. And surely your blood of your lives will I require at the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man. At the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of Elohim made he man. So there you have it. Some states have reinstated the death penalty. But you know what? The punishment comes 15, 20 years after the crime because of these endless appeals. Ecclesiastes, the 8th chapter. Ecclesiastes, the 8th chapter. And look what it says in the 11th verse. Ecclesiastes 8:11. It says, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. We don't carry out the sentence in a speedy fashion, do we? They have endless appeals that they can make. The government today has given in to pious softness, so the proper punishment doesn't really exist for crimes. And for that reason, crime is running rampant. Nobody's really afraid of breaking the law anymore because they figure, oh, I just get a slap on the wrist. Crooks aren't afraid of it. They get 10 years for a murder and are out in 5, supposedly because of good behavior. Many say that God was too strict, too harsh in the Old Testament. Well, like I just said, after seeing the way the world is today with its pious softness, let me ask you, which would you prefer? The pious softness of man or the pious strictness of God? I would say there's way too much pious softness in the church today. God's in the church. God's laws are very clear with respect to people who would not live according to those laws. Ephesians, the 5th chapter. Ephesians 5. Ephesians 5, verse 11. This is what we're told. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. Okay. If that's not enough for you, go to 2 Thessalonians, the 3rd chapter. This is actually talking about people in our congregation. 2 Thessalonians 3:6. 2 Thessalonians 3:6. Now we command you, brethren, in the name of our Master Yeshua Messiah, that you withdraw yourselves from every brother who walks disorderly and not after the tradition which he received of us. As you can see, this is talking about people in the congregation. In the congregation. That's why it uses the word brothers. How about verse 14? And if any man obey not our word by this epistle, note that man and have no company with him, that he may be ashamed. One more, 2 John. 2 John, verse 9. Says, whosoever transgresses and abides not in the doctrine of Messiah has not Elohim. He that abides in the doctrine of Messiah, he has both the Father and the Son. If there come any unto you and bring not this doctrine, receive him not into your house, neither bid him greeting. For he that bids him greeting is partaker of his evil deeds. Okay, so the reason we should withdraw our fellowship is that this person is not in fellowship with God. So why should we be in fellowship with him any longer? 1 John 1. 1 John 1, verse 5. This then is the message which we have heard of him and declare unto you, that Elohim is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and we do not the truth. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, then we have fellowship one with another. And the blood of Yeshua Messiah, his son, cleanses us from all sins. So you can't have fellowship with God if you're walking in darkness, and we should not have fellowship with a person who is like that. That would only serve to bring us into the darkness. And who should be the ones leading the church and the withdrawal of fellowship? Why, the elders in the church, of course. The deacons, deaconesses, and the pastors. You know what? Yet many of them object. They demand more time to encourage the person to return, to the point where withdrawal comes months or even years after the event. Many have come to believe that withdrawal is the end of encouragement to live right. They don't see that as an encouragement for the person to correct himself, when that's exactly what it's designed to do. And you know what? It does work too. Churches now tolerate, another word for pious softness, tolerate. They tolerate sin of every kind. There is no demand of Christians to live as shining lights in a world of darkness. Christians are allowed to live any way they wish without any fear of correction. A good example is in the area of false teachers. The scriptures are very clear in that area. Very clear. Let's go to Romans. We're winding it on down. Romans 16. Romans 16, and I will read verses 17 and 18. Romans 16, 17. Now I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause divisions. Mark them. Take note of them. See who they are. Mark them which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which you have learned, and then avoid them. For they that are such serve not our Master, Yeshua Messiah, but their own belly, and by good words and fair speeches deceive the hearts of the simple. There was no delay back then when sin was recognized like there is today. There were no endless one more chances. Those false teachers were got rid of in a hurry. Post haste. Again, the elders in the church, the deacons and the pastors and the deaconesses ought to take the lead in this area. Acts 20. Acts the 20th chapter. Acts 20:28. Take heed therefore unto yourselves and to all the flock over the which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to feed the assembly of Elohim which he has purchased with his own blood. For I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after them. Therefore watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I cease not to warn everyone night and day with tears. Titus, the 1st chapter. And the 9th verse. Titus 1:9. Holding fast the faithful word as he has been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the gainsayers. For there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not, for filthy lucre's sake. So they were doing it for money, huh? Have to watch out for people like that. But you know what? There are many elders, deacons, and pastors who can't tell the false teacher from the true gospel preacher. Can't do it. They let false teachers in among the congregation, and before you know it, the whole flock has been led astray. And we should be very thankful we have a pastor who can spot the wolves who would lead us astray. But those leaders of the church without good discernment powers invite wolves into the flock. In many thousands of congregations across the country, you will find more and more there is toleration or pious softness of false teachers. What you see is that those who stand for the truth are persecuted as too harsh and too unloving. Therefore, there is far too little of the marking and withdrawing of fellowship as it is demanded by God. I mentioned earlier that it was Eli's duty to remove sin in the form of his 2 sons from the priesthood, probably from Israel, and maybe from life altogether. I want to talk a little bit about what may be an unknown fact where that's concerned, and that is putting away sin from our lives has a double meaning. The meaning referred to the most when the subject of putting sin out of our lives comes up is that we're to put the sin that's in us out of us, right? We're to kill that inward sinful man by overcoming our sinful natures. That's the most popular understanding we have about putting sin out of our lives. But you know what? The other meaning of putting sin out of our lives refers to putting sin out of the places where we spend our lives. You know, like our homes and our churches. Certainly, we may have no control over places where we work, you know, and other public places like that. But we certainly have control over our homes and our churches. Therefore, this instruction applies not only to our own actions, but to the actions of those closest and dearest to us. It's not enough to God that we not sin. We must not allow our loved ones, especially our children, to commit grievous sin and still live with us. If our child wants to cohabit without the benefit of marriage against our wishes, send them somewhere else to do it. Don't let it go on in your house. Don't let it occur in your home. If your child wants to do drugs or sell drugs, send them somewhere else to do it if they don't want to stop. Don't let it happen in your home. If I had done such a thing in my parents' home, you know, since drugs are illegal, boy, they would have turned me straight over to the law after they beat me a few times. Bam. If I wanted to rob and steal against my parents' wishes, they would not have harbored me from the law. They would have just turned me in. Even though we may be successful at overcoming the sin inside us, God would not hold us blameless for allowing it in our homes and our churches. Now, as for putting sin out of our churches, I give you 1 Corinthians 5. That's a really good example right there. 1 Corinthians 5. And I'll begin in verse 1. 1 Corinthians 5, verse 1. This is Paul talking to the Corinthian church. It is reported commonly that there is fornication among you, and such fornication as is not so much as named among the Gentiles, that one should have his father's wife. And you are puffed up, and have not rather mourned that he that hath done this deed might be taken away from among you. For I verily, as absent in body, but present in spirit, have judged already, as though I were present, concerning him that hath so done this deed. In the name of our Master Yeshua Messiah, when you are gathered together, and my spirit, with the power of our Master Yeshua Messiah, to deliver such a one unto Satan for the destruction of the flesh, that the spirit may be saved in the day of the Master Yeshua. Your glorying is not good. Know you not that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? If you allow someone who just robbed a grocery store to hide out in your home, say because they're your child, you are guilty of allowing leaven to leaven the whole lump. You are guilty of letting sin contaminate your home. And unless you want to end up like Eli, you would do something about it. Like turn them over to the law. Let's finish this. Verse 7. Purge out therefore the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you are unleavened. For even Messiah, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. Therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. I wrote unto you in an epistle not to company with fornicators, yet not altogether with the fornicators of this world, or with the covetous, or extortioners, or with idolaters, for then must you needs go out of the world. But now I have written unto you not to keep company, if any man that is called a brother be a fornicator, or covetous, or an idolater, or a railer, or a drunkard, or an extortioner. With such a one, no, not to eat. For what have I to do to judge them also that are without? Do not you judge them that are within? But them that are without, Elohim judges. Therefore, put away from among yourselves that wicked person. Get rid of that person. And it's really to help correct that person. And you know it worked. 2 Corinthians is written to show that that man repented and they welcomed him back into the church. So you can't say that, putting people out of the church doesn't work. But that's what God wants us to do. He doesn't want us to act as if we're so pious and yet allow grievous sins to be perpetrated by our loved ones in our churches and in our homes. If they don't want to listen to our admonishments, send them packing. That adds to the meaning behind, it adds to the meaning behind the symbolic removal of leavening from our homes. Putting sin out of your life has that double meaning of removing the sin from inside you and removing the sin from the places in which you live your life. Eli failed to fully live up to this admonishment. He only did half the job. And halfway is not good enough for God. He only did half his job, and for that he was labeled as an unfit dad. Don't let this happen to you. While you're busy putting sin out of your life, be sure to put the sin out around you as well. Don't overlook that. And you will be fully living up to God's command that we live sin-free lives. Just because you don't sin doesn't mean you're not a sinner, right? If you allow people around you to sin, people over which you have control, you are sinning as well. We can't rid the world of sin, but we can sure get rid of it in and around us. That's the way to live free and in peace. And that's all God wants for us, to live free and in peace. So do that. Live free, and peace be unto you all.